Good morning, data people. It's my fourth time today at Crunch Conference. So I've been here as an attendee for the past 3 years, and it's the first time for me today as a speaker. And to be honest, it feels pretty awesome standing in front of you. And I hope that the next 40 minutes hold, at least for some of you, some value. If it doesn't, then it probably means that you're already doing a pretty good job when it comes to requirements engineering in data science. As I'm working for Runtastic and we are a very sporty company, I also tried to structure my talk a little bit in that regard. So after a little introduction, we will then face our challenge that we are going to talk about today. And after that, we're going into what I call the training phase, so we get familiar with the problem and actually learn how to tackle it. And in the end, of course, there's race day, and we will look back at what we learned and see actually how we can apply that. But first, let me introduce you to myself and to Runtastic. So I'm actually studied medical informatics and then got into the IT of an Austrian healthcare provider for about 4.5 years, and did there a lot of things like project management, IT infrastructure management, and things like that. And this was actually the first time when I came into contact with requirements engineering, because when you're in healthcare, you're dealing with doctors being your stakeholders, and they are very smart people and they know their shit, and that's why you actually already in university studying medical informatics or medical or other technical jobs related to medicine, you are learning to speak like the doctors are used to speak. So you are learning all the medical terms, the diseases, and so on. So you don't waste time with your stakeholders, so they have to explain to you what they are meaning. In 2013, I joined Runtastic. Back then, we were about 60 people, and I was the first BI analyst on board. So I was tasked to start off the whole data initiative. And over the past few years, we developed the necessary architecture, the services, and also the organization around that. On the private side, I'm a passionate cyclist, both on the road and off the road, which also plays a little part in my talk today. Moving over to the company, for those of you who don't know what we are doing, we are a digital company in the health and fitness area. We develop mobile apps around health and fitness. And our vision is, in a nutshell, to make every individual on this planet more healthy and therefore also increase their well-being. Today, we have approximately 150K downloads every day and have currently a total of over 136 million registered users. In the beginning, what we did when we started out already 9 years ago is that our business was very much driven by the reach that we got through app downloads. And also the business model was based on people downloading apps that costed something, which are called, let's say, one-off purchases. But to make this into a sustainable business model, you had to always build new apps as people already bought the apps that you already produced. So this got harder and harder over time, which made us change our business model into what it is today. So today, we are focusing on 3 core products, which is, of course, the Runtastic running and fitness app that supports you to track your activities with GPS, the results app, which is essentially a body weight training app with which you can engage in a training plan scaled to your fitness level, and you can train wherever you want in the hotel, at home, in the gym, so it's pretty flexible. And the third and newest addition to the core apps is the Balance app, which is a competitor to LiveSum, MyFitnessPal, and gives you the opportunity to track your food intake, to set goals if you want to reduce weight or if you just want to eat healthy. And around these core products, we build a subscription model that gives you the full feature set in all of these products. So you're not paying a subscription for one of these apps, but with the Runtastic subscription, you get the full feature set in all of our products. As the market evolved, it also got tougher to get people to buy or to download our products because there's a lot of competition. App ideas that were innovative some years ago got copied a lot. And this is why we currently rely a lot on paid user acquisition. So you have to advertise for your apps on networks like Facebook, Instagram, and other channels to get people to download and install your application and then eventually also to purchase your premium membership. And this is something that is now our business model is very closely tied to. So we have to report on it very exactly how much money we are spending on an average user and how much money are we getting in and when this money is coming in and when we actually then reach a break-even point. And last but not least, what we're also trying to do based on our vision is that we want to not only empower people to live a more active lifestyle, but we also want to educate people how they can change their life to be more healthy. And this is why social media content and also the content on our blog is also part of this portfolio of features and products that we want to offer our users. So now a little bit more about how we developed our data infrastructure and organization. So as I said, I started in 2013, and back then everything that we had were some external tools that gave us insights about our products, about the app market, and of course our production databases. And the founder team had built some, let's say, some pretty basic Excel-based reports around that, and this is what I found and what I took on and then developed over the course of several months into, let's say, a first draft of a corporate report system. The first limitation that we hit was that with the clone of the production database that I got, we couldn't calculate monthly active users anymore. So the query just didn't run through anymore, which is actually a good thing because it just was a symptom of the company growing very rapidly. So back in 2013, we had year-over-year growth of always between 300% and 400% in all key metrics. So the team at this point were, apart from me, another data analyst, and we then very quickly saw that with the methods at hand, we could not evolve further and automate more. So the next thing that we did is that we started building a data warehouse. We did this with very little financial risk, so we opted for a Microsoft SQL Server and also hired 2 data engineers to help us with this development. In the next 2 years, we also started to implement a Hadoop cluster because we knew already that the data warehouse is only supposed to integrate the data that we are having and that we need for our business questions, but it should not really fill up with all the action data, with all the event data that we are collecting from our users. This is why we said we also need a place where we can put all this mass data and save it and prepare it for when to use it in the data warehouse. So 2 years later, we were 4 people and had a ratio 1-to-1 between analysts and data engineers. 1 year after that, we kind of took the opportunity for one of the engineers, for one of the analysts to leave, and actually us wanting to tip our toes into what's data science and switching completely from analysts to data scientists. So what my thought back then was, already in the position of team lead, that basically the things that were to be happening on the corporate reporting side that we at that point had pretty much automated can also be done by data engineers while giving them, by data scientists while giving them enough time to working on more interesting things. So this is why only 1 year later we had then scaled to 3 data scientists and 4 data engineers. Another concept that we introduced at that time is what we call the data product factory. So based on Hadoop, we then tried out the first data products to be implemented with Spark. And we tried also to build first, like very rudimentarily, the necessary processes to deploy and maintain data products on this platform as we slowly but steadily got closer together with product managers and other departments in what actually could be done with data on this more advanced level. Today, where we are is actually a very tough spot, because although we could hire more data scientists, we currently are kind of stuck at 4 data engineers, which currently poses a big bottleneck in what we can do, and is also part of why requirements engineering has such a big role, because of the scarce resources in data engineering. So we want to ensure in the requirements engineering process to have the data engineers be involved at the latest possible point, or if we have to involve them, to really have all the information prepared in a very efficient way. So what were the challenges that we had to face in the past year, given this organizational setting? As I said, user acquisition became more important. So first, there was no paid user acquisition, then there was some paid user acquisition, but it was still working like very easily. So like you spend some dollars here, you spend some dollars there, and people were buying and everything was fine. But as the team grew in user acquisition, and also how they worked became more sophisticated, the existing reporting did not work for them anymore. So the demand on reliability, on availability, also on what the report could do, actually increased very much in only a few months. So what we said is that we need to redo the whole reporting from ground up, and to do that, we first need to understand what the business needs. Which brings us to our challenge. We need to create value from data at the risk of producing something that doesn't have so much value. But before we get into the topic that we had at work, I want to start with a more simple example from my private life. So for me, as I said in the beginning, cycling is more of a passion than a hobby. And at some point, I decided I want to buy a new road bike. And if you're in road cycling, there's a lot of technology, and I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to that. So I had a lot of things to consider, not only like what color it might be, or what budget, or what brand, but also, do I actually need electronic shifting? Do I want to get on the disc brake train very early? What tire size do I want to run? And this took me several months. And also I drew some diagrams and figured out which of these requirements is actually more important to me. And in this process, I guess it's fair to say that I drove my girlfriend pretty mad. But in the end, it was totally worth it, and these are the components that I got finally. And I guess my point being is that if going through requirements is already that hard when you're like your own stakeholder and you're the only one who has to browse through endless forums and reviews of components, how much harder is it actually to work on requirements in a business area that you, first of all, do not understand? And this is why requirements engineering in data science is so important. First of all, it's important because it helps you to define the purpose. Because people that talk to you, stakeholders that talk to you, tend to tell you what they want, but this is not always what they need. So you need to get to what they need. Secondly, in talking and in communication, there's a lot of ambiguity. So people say one thing when they actually mean another. And also, what requirements engineering does for you is that it provides more structure. Because people, some people at least, mainly not data people, but other people, tend to be chaotic. And the last thing is it helps you to focus and not to lose yourself in the possibilities, which is a danger for us as data engineers and data scientists, because we want to do cool things with the data, right? But also in the possibilities that a product or the department thinks they want to have, although they are not in a position to apply it maybe yet. So now we know why requirements engineering is such a big deal, and now we go into the details of how we approached it at Runtastic. So entering the training phase, first thing is that we are embracing the agile development process. We are working, actually we've been working with Scrum for a very long time, but only like since a year or so, we actually feel comfortable to say that we do Scrum. So being agile and using Jira are two very different things. So what we did at first is that whenever like a request from a user came in, we just one-to-one wrote this request down into a Jira ticket, and in the next sprint, some of the data scientists or data engineer would deal with that. But it turned out that this actually had a lot of insecurities and unclarity involved, because stakeholders do not describe what they want in much detail. They just say, I want this, I want that, but not with a detailed description. So what happened in the sprints is that data scientists had to sit down with the stakeholders, clarify what they actually wanted, and by the end of the sprint they maybe had a rough idea, but they definitely had not yet produced the results that they were asked for. So stories got taken on into the next sprint. What we are doing right now is that when a request comes in, and we don't understand in detail what the request is about, we sit down with the stakeholders in a story writing workshop and define in detail what they actually want. Because this not only allows us to put a story point number then on this task, but it also allows us to understand in a better way of how to get in the fastest possible way from where we are now to what the business user wants, or to fail in doing so, because both is possible. So sometimes the data just does not yield the question or the answer that the user is looking for. So the key to success is here to write well-defined user stories. And what we use as fundamental definitions in doing so, we have a definition of ready and a definition of done. This is basically a checklist how a user story needs to be defined to be able to get into the sprint in the first place. This is the definition of ready. So it's ready for development. Definition of done are then fundamental values that need to be checked when the story is considered to be finished. This includes peer review, this includes testing, this includes documentation. So things that you should not write every time in your story because they should be taken for granted. Therefore, and as some of those things are not to be taken for granted, at least not at first, you have to define them so you have a certain set of rules that applies to everyone. What is then individually important for every user story are the acceptance criteria. For those of you who are familiar with that, it's simply the checklist of what the user story should produce as a result. And if all the acceptance criteria are checked, it should be very likely that the result contains what the business user asked for. Secondly, communication is key. I think it's clear for everyone that a data scientist is supposed to be good in math and statistics, to be a reasonable coder. But what is often missed is that a data scientist is a very communicative job. You have to talk to stakeholders. Maybe your organization provides you with someone who does this for you, so you have a PO or someone on your team, but if you don't, the data scientist is the role that needs to talk to the stakeholders. And in our case, this also lifts a lot of effort from the data engineering department because the data scientist is in a unique position to translate what the business user needs into the language that the data engineers can understand. So to understand what the users want, you have to talk to them, so you have to involve them. And for the building of the user acquisition report, we actually had months and months of workshops with the user acquisition team. So we understood their language, what they were talking about, what actually their requirements were, and vice versa, also to make them understand what data we had available and how they could actually use it and what would make sense for them. And this goes down to very simple things like, for example, what country attribute to use. So a country attribute is mostly passed along for a lot of different entities. So the user has a country, the app open has a country, the purchase has a country. And you cannot simply decide on your own which country is the right one to use, because eventually the country that you are using is then not consistent with the country that the ad networks in the user acquisition are using, and therefore the data that you will display on a country level will diverge from what is shown in the networks. So you're creating a lot of insecurity, not because your data is not correct, but it's structured differently. So we need to understand how the data needs to be structured from a business side to do this correctly, and this is why we got very, very deep into how user acquisition works. Last thing is, talking is one thing, but communicating efficiently is something different. So this takes practice, this takes training. So I would really highly recommend giving your data scientists time to learn this, to give them time to do training in this regard, because the more efficient you communicate, the less time you need to get the requirements right, the more time you have for actually deployment or development. So apart from the big use case of user acquisition, I want to give you today a very small example, so a very simple request that comes in through our Ask BI Slack channel. This is actually a real request that we got a couple of months ago, and with this request I want to go through the rest of the things that you should keep in mind when doing requirements engineering. So the request sounded word to word like that. How many premium users do we currently have in the Runtastic app active since the last 2 months? So for those of you who are native speakers in English, you will recognize that this sentence is maybe not completely grammatically sound. This happens when you are in a 250-person team with over 40 different nationalities. So you have to know about that speech and language alone poses a limitation, and that this puts on you the need to clarify things. So the first thing that we need to understand when we get a question like that is, why do people ask this question? Because how I answer this question may differ from why this question was asked in the first place. And here I can recommend a resource that's called The Golden Circle by Simon Sinek, which is going very much into detail into the importance of communicating the why. Because the why makes you understand what vision, what value, what big picture is behind something, and then gives you the opportunity to build something that is aiming for the why and not for the what. Secondly, what the why does for you is that it helps you tailor your solution to be fit for purpose. So I think we are all at some point guilty to try to make the perfect data product, the perfect analysis, the perfect chart. But in the end, it's always better to do what is necessary rather than to make something perfect, because the next task is already around the corner, and the longer you take with one task, the longer it takes you to get to the next one. So sometimes it's better to do less, especially if where you're putting your input in is already at the high end of optimizing something towards 100% perfection, rather than really being at this first slope where you increase the quality of your output very drastically, but only by putting in 1 or 2 more hours. And this is what you need to be aware of. Where are you on this curve? Are you like on the downslope, really fast rising, or are you already like evening out towards 100% at the top? And the last thing that should also in Agile being taking into account is that the first version, or let's say if something is only an ad hoc analysis, you only have to do once but never again, but you should at least think about what would be the next steps, or the why also tells you, is this probably something that I have to redo on a monthly basis? Is this something that I have to run at scale, or things like that? So knowing actually the reasons behind the question gives you also an outlook on, do I have to build this in a way that I can reuse it or that I can run it at scale? So we asked for the why. So why do you need this? The answer was, to try out a new SDK that offers additional functionality, we want to make sure to get enough credits to make it available for all premium users during the test phase. Okay, that's pretty reasonable. So how are we moving on from there? We need to strive for clarity. So there's still some questions open, so we need to ask those questions to really get the query and the result right. Apart from that, it's also important, the more complex a request is, that you also communicate it in the right way. Not only to to help your own mind to not forget important details and then probably have to do another meeting to clarify again on that, but also if then other stakeholders like data engineers are involved, to be able to have this written down somewhere so they have really a detailed documentation to go through when they are then implementing the data set behind the request. What also was something in the past year that we put an emphasis on was meeting culture. I put this little monkey here because to some of you this might seem pretty obvious, but I think that in a lot of organizations, meetings are not really done efficiently. So what helped us out is that in every meeting, especially in requirements engineering meetings, we appoint a head and we appoint another person who takes meeting notes. It's very important that this is not the same person, because if the discussions get very heated, it's actually very difficult to write down stuff and like keep people in line at the same time. And it's also very important to have a goal for each meeting and to have action items that you want to go through, and also that you then say, okay, this is now the outcome of the meeting, and this is the point where we then keep on going in the next meeting. Because in the past, it always took us 5 to 10 minutes to say, okay, what did we agree on last time? And then you're actually redoing the things that you did in the last meeting in the end, you're redoing in the next meeting in the beginning, and you lose a lot of time. So as I said, to strive for clarity, we need to ask the right questions. One question for our example could be, by active, you mean app sessions or sport activities? This makes a difference, as we don't know, based on the why, what additional functionality the SDK offers, if this is something that is only applying to people who actually do a sport activity, or to all the people who are eventually opening the app. This makes a difference. So the answer to this question was app sessions. Next question. By since, you mean that they are new users? And if yes, new in a reference to their install or to their premium membership? The answer to this is no, all users. Actually, this question would have been obsolete if I would have cared to ask the why when I got this request in the first place, because based on the why, I already know that they are interested in to have all the premium users accounted for. But as this was as I said, very simple answer, always, sometimes we still don't ask for the why or don't bother to ask for the why. But as it turns out, it makes things down the line more easy. Next question. Do you want the result being aggregated across platforms? Runtastic apps are usually available on both iOS and Android, and we don't know if the SDK is available on both platforms. So to give them only one number could actually lead them down the wrong path if they're only interested in one of the platforms. Answer to this question is no, split by platforms. Which takes us to the last question, which is maybe a little bit too detailed, but just to make sure, by the last 2 months, do you mean August and September, or today minus 60 days, which also could make a little bit of a difference, and the answer here was August and September. Why did I ask that? Because I don't know when they are going to run this experiment, this test phase, and being a sport brand, we have a very huge seasonality going on. So August and September might have other numbers than if we are moving more into autumn. So this is important to take into account. So now basically, by asking these questions, we actually specified almost all the parameters that we need to write our query. This is what we did, and we delivered the answer with very detailed specifications. So, now it's time for race day and to recap what we talked about. So first and foremost is requirements engineering is hard. It takes a lot of time. There is no simple and unified solution. But if you understand the why, it helps you to define how to do something and what to actually do. If you communicate well, you are able to eliminate ambiguity. And if you provide clarity and structure and embrace the agile process to get shit done, and you apply all of that, then you might just might end up with something that has great value to you or to others. Thank you.
That was very efficient. I even didn't expect you already to take questions. We have some questions. So, You tend to refer to data scientists as a product owners within the Scrum framework. Don't you see a further intermediate PO's role necessary between users and the developers, data scientists or data engineers? That's the first one on the top. The first one?
I'm like trying to get the point.
Does the person who asked the question wants to clarify it?
Yes, no,
No.
I'm okay. So I think this comes from us still being at a very low scale. So basically, I'm supposed to be the product owner, but it's impossible for me to be everywhere at the same time, as we're dealing from use cases that start with corporate reporting to smart features. So I would be very much a bottleneck, which brings us to the point of the data scientists needing to be to take on this role of a product owner. What also we need to take into account is that at our scale we are still a centralized team, but we are, let's say, at the brink of changing that, because if we grow a little further, we can accommodate a smaller, let's say, core data team, while distributing data science resources into the product teams where they're actually most needed. And then we actually would account for this organization, the product owner dealing with the requirements engineering in the respective product team and relieving the data scientist of this role. Is this answering the question?
Thank you so much. So next one. Why do you have so many apps for different sports? Other competitors like Garmin have only one app for all the sports which provide better UX. Were there any analysis or A/B testing on that?
Okay, if this didn't get clear from the intro into our history, is yes, this is a different approach than almost all of our competitors are taking. Also because of how our competitors, Garmin is a special case, or Suunto or Polar. What they are doing is they are building expensive tracking devices, and they then later on had the need to build also the digital part of this product, like a web front end and applications around that because of the user's demand. Our main competitors like Endomondo, Runkeeper, Strava came also from the digital side, but with the difference to us that they were backed by venture capital. They did not have to be profitable right from the beginning, but we did. So what we did is what we did best at that time, building apps. And so we built a lot of apps at a certain point in time that we knew that would bring in revenue to sustain our growth. And basically this is why we invested in diverging a lot and really building a lot of different apps and now have to focus down on what's actually in the core of our product portfolio.
Thank you. So how do you train your data scientists to communicate effectively? Close them into the room and wait until they reach the consensus usually?
So I guess mostly I have to say we do a lot of in-house trainings. This goes mostly into the direction of presentation techniques. But when it comes to requirements engineering, I try to teach them as much as possible by attending big projects in the beginning because of my background from healthcare. And people then learn this on the job. And the more you ask the wrong questions, the more you get requirements wrong, the more you learn about it. This is unfortunately the best way to learn this, by making mistakes, and this is also what we allow in our organization, that you learn by making mistakes. If it's a high-risk project, there are mostly one more experienced data scientist or myself on the project educating someone else in the role, for example, that one person is the head in the team and moderating the meetings, and the other person taking notes. And in the next project, the person who took the notes can already take the lead probably in this next project.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions maybe. What is, in your opinion, the difference between data analyst and data scientist? The examples seem to me more like a task for the analyst.
Yes.
That's it.
So the change from data analyst to data scientist was made out of opportunity to hire people with an, let's say, advanced skill set. So how I see a data analyst is someone who does not necessarily need to be familiar with Python or with R, but should be sufficient with like building dashboards or using like SQL as a querying tool. But as we had the opportunity to hire either a data scientist or a data engineer, a data analyst, at that point I opted for hiring rather a data scientist, because this is where I thought that our needs would evolve into strategically. So this was a strategic move. And also at this point now, retrospectively, it turned out to be a good decision, because what we are going to try now is, as we are focusing more on the data science tasks in our team, we want to empower and develop the analytics resources more in the departments outside. So we have already here and there some key users in place, and when it comes to the outcome of the user acquisition project, what we provided is actually almost a naked data set that was built on the requirements very closely with the stakeholders. And apart from everything else that we did before, the user acquisition team was then, by understanding how this data set looks like, able to build their own reports based on that. So this is a complete shift in what we needed to focus on bringing us back to actually the more sophisticated tasks and away from the basic business analytics.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time, and our tech team complains that they want to have coffee. So let's thank our dear presenter.
Thank you.